Hey everyone, you're listening to InfoQuench with Jeff.
And Amy. We're chatting about how to get the most out of life.
And covering a ton of interesting topics.
So there's sure to be something.
For just about everyone. Let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to InfoQuench. I'm your host, Jeff.
And I'm Amy, and this is part 2 of our episodes on negotiating. And the reason we wanted to cover negotiating is I think whether we're conscious of it or not, negotiation comes into many aspects of our lives.
Yeah, you can do it with your kid. You can do it with your boss. You can do it when you're buying stuff. I mean, it's across the board in everyday life.
And so I wanted to start out with just a quick recap of what we talked about in part 1, but definitely go back and listen to it if you haven't caught it yet. We talk about whether or not you should make a first offer and cover a lot of content from Chris Voss, who is a retired FBI hostage negotiator. And we'll cover a little bit more of his tips in this
He looks
episode as
just
well.
like what you would think a hostage negotiator would look like.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to Google him, it's Voss, V-O-S-S.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Check him out. And we covered what BATNA means, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. We talked about the idea of labeling, which is to basically name or acknowledge the elephant in the room at the beginning of the negotiation so it doesn't become an obstacle.
A good tactic.
And that you can address it on the front end. We talked about how to ask calibrated questions. So rather than ask somebody, for instance, what do you think the next steps are, you could say something along the lines of...
It seems like you've been thinking you've got something in mind. What would that be?
Right.
Kind of thing.
And it tends to let the information flow, the dialogue flow. People are more apt to share immediately what's on their mind rather than...
Yes, I remember him saying that you'd be surprised at how quickly people divulge their information or their game plan when you say a question like that to them.
Right. So it's just a matter of a little bit of rephrasing. And he also talked about the fact that we often associate negotiations with money, but that time is also a very important currency in terms of negotiating. And a lot of our everyday negotiations are around our own time and protecting that valuable time.
Before we did part 1, I knew absolutely nothing about negotiating, to be honest. I didn't. Like we said at the top of the podcast, that everybody does it though. Everybody negotiates in one way or another, almost probably every day.
Well, I didn't really know much about it either.
No.
And I think when we're trying to pick topics for these episodes, I choose things that I'm genuinely interested in and want to learn more about to do better at in life. We really focus on life improvement tips, and we don't want them to be overly complicated, but we want to give you some practical information you can actually implement in daily life.
Did you try implementing any of the things that we learned in part 1?
Actually, some of the tips that we're going to cover in this one,
cool.
I have been working on. So
let's get to it.
We're going to start with a quote, as we do every episode. And this one was referenced in part 1, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper with it this time. It's by Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
A book you read.
I did, and I think a lot of people have. It's been on the bestsellers list, I think, for probably, I don't know how long.
A book that you've been at me to read, and I haven't.
It's great. It's one of the classics, sort of, up there with Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's one of those go-to books that's, it's timeless, timeless advice. So this quote is, "Seek first to understand and then to be understood." And this is applicable in a lot of contexts, but, especially so in negotiating. But Stephen Covey himself summarizes his quote, or I guess paraphrases his quote as, "If I were to summarize in one sentence the single most important principle I've learned in the field of interpersonal relations, it would be this," which is... Once again, to seek first to understand and then be understood. And it just helps you... A lot of people
don't seek to understand the other person's point of view at all.
And and if you start out a negotiation without making that effort to seek to understand, you're operating in the dark. You don't really have a good, awareness of what the other party's looking for during the negotiation. And that can make things,
it kind of shows a little bit of ignorance as well, to a degree, because if you're not going to try and understand another person's point of view when it comes to negotiating, and you just go in and you're just all, very strong with your own idea, then it doesn't really translate too well for like the end outcome, I don't think.
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of people do approach negotiation as going in with a bit of a thinking that they're going to be stubborn.
Right.
They want to be strong in their position. They don't want to give in, and that's not necessarily the way to be successful in a negotiation. So let's jump into a few more tips from Chris Voss. He talks about even the idea of trying to find common ground with whomever you're negotiating. Sometimes it's just not there. So it's more important to listen to what they're looking for, what they need from the negotiation. It can be completely separate from what you're going into looking for, but it doesn't mean it's not important. It's something that'll come into play in the inevitable outcome of whether or not you're successful in reaching an agreement. And one of the I guess the quick tips he said is, and he actually said this has a success rate of 100% in terms of people who have listened to him speak or have read his books or have implemented this tip. And he said it's about getting people to intentionally say no.
Intentionally say no.
Now, I've heard the opposite, that when you can get people to say yes, it'll get them into a more agreeable mindset. But
now, what is it exactly that's 100% when you say no?
So what he means is that in terms of suggesting an approach or something. So if I wanted you to, load the dishwasher a different way.
Right, which you always do.
And I could say, would you do this? And I hope for that yes. But people are more comfortable saying no. It makes them feel protected. So if I would say, are you against the idea of...
Oh, I get it
now. Listening to how I want to do... It's essentially it allows people to say no, which they're comfortable with.
So he's basically saying that it's 100% success rate when you phrase that negotiation with making the other person say no.
Right. And I don't think he's talking about a major negotiation where there's a lot of back and forth in terms of, what the terms will be.
That's interesting.
But this is more just the idea of, trying to get somebody to try something out or to go along with your idea. So rather than say, would you like to try this? And people become quite guarded. You say something along the lines like, would you be opposed
would you be against putting all the glasses on the bottom portion of the dishwasher? And I would have to say, no, they go on the top. And then you won. Right?
Yes. There you go. It all comes down to the dishwasher.
That's
it
really
always comes back
though.
To the dishwasher.
That's really interesting, though, that I'm trying to think of all the different scenarios in which you could get the other person that you're negotiating with to say no from just saying a question. That disarms them, correct? Is that why he says it's successful? Is because...
Well, it's a safe answer for people. Okay. I think when people are going into... or they're having a conversation where they're trying to protect their position, they feel more comfortable saying no. So if you say, or would you be opposed to this? Or, are you against the idea of us doing it this way? It tends to make people more amenable to whatever you're suggesting.
So if you took that concept and put it on to like a larger scale, say you're like a big business and you're saying, you could come in and say, so you're not looking for $2 trillion, are you? Like that kind of thing. And they're like, no. And then because they're actually looking for $1 trillion. Do you know what I mean?
$1 trillion.
$1 trillion. I don't know why I chose trillion. I live in a fantasy world, I guess.
Of Scrooge McDuck, just diving through the coins.
Exactly.
I want to talk about some tips that came specifically from masterclass.com. And they talked about when you're negotiating around money that you should use concrete numbers rather than a range. And,
concrete numbers.
Yeah. Part of this one seemed a bit obvious to me. I don't know if people could pick up on
it's okay.
On our good old cat Charlie. He always makes an appearance. When you're selling a product, you don't tell somebody, you're hoping to get somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $700 for this item.
Right.
Because as soon as you give people a range, they will automatically know that the lower number in that range is an acceptable price for you.
That's
and they will automatically go to that.
That's
so there's no way that you're likely to get above that because they know you basically told them what your final offer is at the onset.
That's really interesting because on Kijiji, if you're selling something, say you're selling something for $500, when you list it for $525 because you're already negotiating. You know that when someone wants to buy it, they're going to want that $25 off. So then you're going to get what you want, which is $25 or which is $500. Do you know what I mean by that?
Well, yes.
You're already negotiating without even talking to somebody.
We talked a little bit about this in part 1 about the idea of high anchoring.
Yeah.
If you're the buyer, you're low anchoring. You're going in low, knowing that you'll be comfortable spending a little bit more, and as a seller, you're probably going in high, knowing you'd be comfortable accepting a little bit less.
That's right, yeah.
We watched an episode of House Hunters.
International, right?
I think it was international. Oh, yeah. It's usually international. That's how we're getting our travel fix during the pandemic as we watch people buy homes in exotic places.
Yeah, and complain that there's no 2 sinks in the bathroom.
I know.
Wait, I don't understand that.
I don't, get it together, people, that you both need to be...
Is it like Grand Central Station, like in the morning, like you need 2 sinks?
We must brush our teeth at the exact same time.
Anyway.
I don't get the idea why there needs to be 2 sinks.
Yeah.
It seems excessive.
But no, you were going to say something about house hunters.
I was. They were buying a house, and they basically came back to the realtor and offered a very specific price. It was like, I don't know, $126,560.
$65.33.
I don't know if they went to the cents, but the realtor was like, "Oh, is that a lucky number or something?" And they said, "No, it's just." If we give an exact number, then they know we've really thought about what we can afford and are sort of coming in with something that they likely think is our best offer that we are able to make. Otherwise, why would we be so specific? And they got the house.
And if I remember correctly, their offer was accepted, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if that always works. I'm sure some people see through that tactic, but it was interesting that they went in with something specific.
You don't hear about that one too often, I don't think.
No. Well, I mean, it's rare that somebody's budget would be I can only spend $2 million. Also, I mean, that's another pet peeve. How do these people all have so much money to spend on houses? It's a ridiculous amount of money.
It is.
And sometimes they're buying like second or third
houses. The moment you hear the realtor say, "Oh, I have good news. It's only $2 million," when their asking price or the most that they wanted to pay was like $2,700,000. They're like, "Oh, that's a good price, but $2 million."
I know. Another tip from Masterclass is around the idea of, a best negotiated agreement lets both sides win. So,
yeah.
We just talked about this. If you go in as, trying to make a deal and you have that win-lose mindset, and even if you're successful, if you're long-term doing business, word gets around.
Yeah,
and so,
absolutely.
It makes sense to want to achieve a win-win so you don't alienate future business deals. You should approach each negotiation, each deal ethically, and then you set yourself up for a lifetime of fruitful negotiations rather than just that one-time win. So
I think think
about the long game.
I think it's a traditional notion that in negotiation everybody should come out on top, right? Like everybody should be equally happy with the transaction or whatever happened.
Right, and what that looks like would be different for every discussion. I guess the idea is that there are aspects of the final agreement that both parties are happy with, and then they've both had some concessions as well.
But really, though, each person on either end of the negotiation is literally trying to be a negotiation ninja. They're trying to come out on top and make the other person think that it's an equal negotiation. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
Each person is. So it's like... it's really interesting to me and a little bit deceiving when they say, "Oh, a true negotiation is when both parties come out happy and like on top or whatever." But there's always like someone who wants to get more of a deal in the negotiation than the other.
Well, yes, and the art of negotiation is letting somebody else have your way.
Right, exactly. Which was the quote from part 1, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I pay attention.
Jeff Hayden wrote an article for Inc. magazine. It was called Highly Effective Negotiation Tactics That Anyone Can Use. And he talked about the idea of using silence to your advantage. He said most of us...
I found this really interesting.
And this is the one I'm going to mention that I've been practicing more. And it's just the idea that most of us do talk a lot when we're nervous. I personally just love to talk, so I tend to fill the silence with words whenever I can, which is why we like podcasting, I guess. But people do talk a lot when they're nervous, and when they're talking, they're missing a lot, so they're not really hearing what the other side is looking for. And so if you're not hearing what they need from it, then you're not going to be able to address it.
Right.
So, hold silent. So say you're going to buy something and you make an offer and the seller says, that's way too low.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's almost insulting.
Like say you're going to buy a car and you offer them, I don't know,
$25,000
or $1,000. Well, yeah, it depends on whatever price they're asking. But say you $1,000 less or something like that.
Yeah.
If the seller comes back and says that's way too low, then, just remain silent.
Yeah.
And see because then typically what'll happen is the other person will want to fill that silence. So they may give you some reasons of why they feel the offer is too low. They might share why they need to make the deal quickly. So all things that you can make use of as you move through figuring out a price.
Remain silent and burn holes with your eyes through their skull.
But you wouldn't
as you stare at them. Anyway.
Yeah, I guess that's another trick is,
just stare
not one
right
I came
right
across,
the
eyes. Whole staring daggers tactic of negotiating. But really, if you're talking, you're not going to learn. You're not going to learn some valuable information that you need to keep going and to figure out what they're looking for from the end game. And if you're having more of a discussion, if it's a longer negotiation, ask open-ended questions, not yes or no, so that you can find out more. And, you might not be able to meet in the middle, much less on your side of the middle.
Yeah.
But unless you know what the other people need, you're not really going to get anywhere. So their, I guess, summary is be quiet, and they'll tell you what they need out of the agreement.
Yeah.
And then you work from there.
I wonder how often negotiations completely break off, and there's just no resolution whatsoever.
Well, there's so many different types of negotiation
in life,
right?
Like let's say for example, if there was a union negotiation or something like that, then there's a mediator and then that breaks off all the time,
Well, yes, with collective bargaining, there's an entire process to help work through that, right? So and there are different types of very formal negotiations that have, a process in place that's followed to avoid coming to
It's interesting though, because the ultimate goal is to come to some kind of resolution, but sometimes there just isn't one.
Yeah, and I guess that's true of life.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Another tip from that article is try to never negotiate alone, and they put alone in question marks, or not question marks, quotation marks. That makes more sense. Well, you probably have the final word in a negotiation. The person you're negotiating with may not know that you're the ultimate decision maker, and you can sometimes use that to your advantage. So, if there's a reason that you need to sort of step away and think about what they've offered, just need a little bit more time to contemplate, just say, you know what, I got to talk it over with somebody else, or I've got to run this by someone. Buy yourself a little bit of time. And, you might feel like that seems like a weak position, but
that could put the squeeze on the person you're negotiating with too. Well,
particularly if it's something that's time sensitive and they're looking to get something closed. Another thing is just to ignore bold emotional outbursts or statements, and never assume that everything you hear is true. Sometimes people will throw something at you to throw you off your game at the onset, and it just it's a bit of a bullying tactic. I'm sure in one of Donald Trump's
nonetheless. It's a tactic that probably often works. Yeah, and Trump, you're right. He probably does that all the time. Well, he does.
And if you do feel intimidated, feel free to walk away. Get some distance from the discussion and regroup and then go back to it. But I guess that's just one of the things is a lot of people do go into a negotiation with that bullying mindset, and it's, whether it's something you're dealing with coming at you or you're going in with, it's just not a great way to get to
I can't see it being hugely successful in a large scale, like a large percentage of the time. this bullying tactic. I think more than anything else, it would probably just not scare, but just like make people leave the negotiation. Say, you know what? If you're going to be like that, if you're going to have that tactic, then I'm not going. That's what I would do. Like I wouldn't even negotiate with somebody unless I had to, I guess, for my life or something. You know.
Well, I think a lot of what we know in terms of that hardcore negotiation we see on television.
Yeah.
Which isn't always an accurate depiction, but you know, when you're looking at major company acquisitions and
right
and things like that, definitely things can get a little bit more aggressive particularly when there's a lot of money on the line.
It'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall when there's two bullying negotiators going at the same time. They're just at each other's throats. Well, I can just imagine how.
You can learn a lot by watching that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Eli Broad said, the best move you can make in a negotiation is to think of an incentive the other person hasn't even thought of. And
I like
then
that
meet
one
it.
Too.
So it's the idea of, figuring out something that will benefit them that may not even, and so when you throw it out there, they become quite surprised.
How would you like your child to go to university for free? I can set that up for you if you want to make this deal. Yeah. That kind of thing, Yeah,
throw that in while you're negotiating your next, your rate with your cell phone provider.
Yeah, I can get your kid into Harvard. How about that cheaper rate?
It sounds like one of those outrageous statements we talked about.
Yeah, I know.
You might need to fact check that one. That brings us to our definition for this episode, and it is from the Bright Network. They talk about the idea of coinage, and it refers back to that statement I just made. But coinage is something that means a lot to the other party, but not that much to you. So finding out what the other party's motivation is can allow you to keep coinage for the latter part of negotiation.
So something to throw in at the end of the negotiation that would be the icing on the cake?
Exactly. So one of these, if you're, I don't know if you've ever bought a television or something or a major appliance from a salesman, and they'll throw in a free warranty.
Right. That's true.
or something that's it's a marginal cost to the company or to the salesman's commission, but they sort of give it to you to help close that deal at the end, and it may be something that is quite valuable to you in terms of peace of mind and, knowing you can return whatever it is you're purchasing. So that makes you a little bit more likely to go through with the purchase, but it also is less cost to them to offer it up. So
it's always great to have that icing on the cake to, offer at the end, because what's a cake without icing? I mean,
It's like a cupcake without icing is a muffin.
There you go. But muffins have icing, don't they? Maybe they don't.
I don't think they do.
Okay, maybe they don't. Not chocolate chip muffins, that's for sure.
I think once the icing goes on, that's when it becomes a cupcake.
You're absolutely right.
It goes from healthy to unhealthy with just a little bit of icing.
Either way, though, it's cake.
Yes.
Either way.
You can have your cake and eat your muffin, too. So another tip from Bright Network is just to set the tone at the beginning of a negotiation, particularly a formal negotiation, and to avoid that idea of things getting out of hand, bullying, is to have people agree at the front end that it's going to be a productive and respectful negotiation. And if it does go off the rails at some point, you can always come back to that, anchor back to that initial agreement. This is what we agreed to on the onset, and I feel like we're deviating from that, that line of discussion. So let's circle back. Let's get back to why we came here. So
is it possible, though, that the person that you're negotiating, once you said, look, we're going to have a cordial, is it possible that they may just think, well, I'm kind of insulted that you thought it would be off the rails negotiation right from the get-go, and you know what I mean?
No, I think that it's enough of a standard practice that people wouldn't take it personally. Okay. I've actually been in meetings and different discussions where that's been done in the forefront, and it keeps everything moving along. It's just setting expectations. Everybody is in agreement with what those expectations are, and so when it's less awkward when conversation derails.
Yes.
Because you have something to point back to.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
It's effective that way. And
I imagine there are negotiations that happen where nobody wants to waste any time. It's no, we are not prepared to do that. Yes, we are prepared to do that, but only with this. It's just you know what I mean? No, there's no conversation is just like, well, how do you feel about accepting this much? No. Okay, what about this? No. Like, you know what I mean?
I feel like divorce lawyers would.
Yeah, that's true.
From what I've seen on television anyway, they usually come in with what they're willing to, they have a clear mindset of what they want.
Yeah.
Harvard Law School actually covers a few hard bargaining tactics to watch out for. So I'll sort of go over these ones quickly, but sometimes people will make extreme demands and then follow up with slow, small concessions. So they'll really push hard for something that they know you're not going to give into, and then just start
scaling it back.
Giving you a little bit by little bit. And that really just drags out the entire process. So one way they suggest to sort of head off this tactic is just to have a clear sense of what your own goals are. And this comes back to BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So, even if you don't reach an agreement, you have in your mind what the alternative is, so you can remain calm and you don't have to be rattled by somebody who's being aggressive.
That's true. It's a good point. You can always just have, you have the ace in your hand.
Right. Commitment tactics. So even though you can use this to your advantage, your opponent may also use it against you. So it's when, your opponent may say their hands are tied, that they only have a limited ability to negotiate with you. And that's when you can basically ask, well, who can I speak with that does have the ability to make decisions?
Yeah.
So don't let that be the reason why, you can't reach an agreement. Some people will use a take it or leave it negotiation strategy. And, if time is on your hands, this may be the time to sort of walk away. Or just, even though they say take it or leave it, use a counteroffer.
Sometimes they use a time-sensitive offer as well. You have 24 hours to decide, that kind of thing. The pressure tactic.
Well, and I've watched a lot of those high-end real estate shows where they do this is my final offer, but then somebody comes back with a counter and they accept it.
Exactly.
So oftentimes it is just words. Ed Brodau is a negotiation expert, speaker, author, and he has some great information out there if you want to check out some of his articles and tips. But he talks about the fact that you shouldn't be afraid to ask for what you want. Successful negotiators are assertive, and they challenge things. They challenge, what's coming at them in terms of information, and they know that everything is negotiable. And it's known. He calls this
everything's for sale and everything's negotiable.
Negotiation consciousness.
Yeah.
And there is a difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. So you want to avoid being aggressive, but assertive is, you're looking after your own interests.
It's a fine line, though, right? Being assertive and not coming off as too aggressive.
Well, and a lot of it is in terms of respect, right? So you're taking care of your own interests, but you're respecting the interests of the other party as well. Whereas if you show a lack of regard for their interests, it does come across as being more aggressive.
Absolutely, yeah. No one really wants to do that in a negotiation.
So, like, on a practical level, it means if you're buying a new car, you have the right to, question the asking price of the car.
Yeah.
You can't negotiate unless you know the validity of your, the opposing position.
It's like when we negotiated tires for our car when we bought our Subaru, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. There's always what can you get thrown in too, right?
Yeah.
One quick tip around buying a car is not to mention that you even have a trade-in until you have your final price. Because otherwise that may not be factored in at the same level. So if you do your homework and you know what the value of your trade-in will be, then negotiate as though there is no trade-in, get to your final price, then mention your vehicle so that can come off of what that bottom price is rather than be in the back of the mind of your...
Most people go right in saying, okay, we'll have a trade-in. So,
we always have.
Yeah, we have.
But I definitely...
we're not going to do it next time.
I know.
And we will get a free car.
Yes. No, well, it's just the idea that it gets factored into the the overall price. Mm-hmm. You should always be willing to walk away. It puts yourself in a bad position if you're not able to.
Know when to walk away.
You shouldn't be in a hurry. It's whoever has the most time has a bit of an advantage. And so if you feel rushed, you're likely to make concessions you don't necessarily want to make.
Absolutely.
So I want to just, mention that not all deals work, and that's okay. Some negotiations hit a brick wall, And, that's life. So
That
that's when you
life.
go back to the BATNA and you go back to what the alternative is.
You can't win them all.
But I do want to make a quick takeaway on this one. We did talk about trying to negotiate a bill.
In part one.
Yeah, look at one of your bills and give a call and see if you can get that price down a little bit. No harm in trying. You are the customer. But in this one, we just talk about doing a little role play, maybe with a friend or a spouse to try out some of these negotiation skills, or try them out on your kids.
Yeah.
If you have kids, you can try them out. They'll be none the wiser, and you can just sort of work through some of these ideas, because it is a skill that needs to be practiced in order to
I know I've been trying to practice
successful.
it with our son, like do a little bit, but I kind of forget that sort of mentality of thinking. I want to get back close to it though, clear-minded.
I found this a very fascinating topic, and I hope you guys did too. It was fun to research and fun to share.
Have fun negotiating.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.
Be sure to check out past episodes and subscribe to keep up with what's new.
You can find us anywhere you get your podcast, and why not leave a review?
You can also follow InfoQuench on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Till next time.